Hello, everyone. It is January 31st, 2016, and you're listening to episode 28 of At Percussion. I'm your host, Casey Cangelosi, and with me, as always, are Megan Arns.
Hello.
Laurel Black.
Hi.
And Ben Charles.
Hi, everybody.
So with us today is jazz artist and vibraphonist Warren Wolf. Warren Wolf has studied under John Locke, and that's John Locke, not Joe Locke, of the Baltimore Symphony, as well as the likes of Ed Sandin and Dave Samuels, among others. Warren Wolf has credits with Wynton Marsalis, Lewis Nash, Stefon Harris, Wycliffe Gordon, and Esperanza Spalding, just to name a few. You can check out his debut album as well as the latest album titled Wolfgang at warrenwolfmusic.com. Hey Warren, how are you doing?
Good. How you doing? Pleasure to be here.
Hey, yeah, pleasure to have you. So I understand you're on tour right now, and you ran into Megan at a gig, right?
Well, I was on tour. I'm actually sitting at home in the comfort of my kitchen. Yeah, I ran into Megan. I was on tour with my band. We performed 4 nights in St. Louis at Jazz at the Bistro. Then we came down to Columbia, Missouri, played at Mary's.
Yeah, great. Hey, I just listened to Sunrise as I was getting ready, and it sounds fantastic. How long has that album been out?
That album is about 2 years old now. So
Okay.
We're preparing for the new release, which will be out, I would say, in about late June. And the title of that record will be Convergent. And it will be on the Mac Avenue label. That label is based out of Detroit, Michigan.
Perfect. I was listening to something on your website, little interview with you, and I believe something from your producer or recording engineer, someone else on there, and they were talking about you being kind of a more, do you consider yourself more of a traditional jazz musician?
If you want to call it that, I wouldn't call it a traditional. I mean, that's what a lot of the general public always like to be in certain categories. I'm honestly a musician who likes to play multiple styles of music. If you listen to that record, you can hear bits of jazz. You can hear actually a lot of classical music in there. If you come to my live shows, depending on the audience or the crowd, you might hear a little bit of rock and roll. You might hear some R&B. You never know what the situation might be. But on that record, I will say it's half and half traditional, half classical.
You know, as I was listening to Sunrise, I thought to myself, this sounds really polished, which to me is a very new sound, like that nice produced sound. Everything's like super clean, super articulate, and just has that really smooth, you can crank the volume up to 100 and your ears don't hurt kind of sound. That's a very new thing to me. But it also sounded so fresh, and it sounded like new, fresh jazz without you having to, like, you know, dump coffee on your vibraphone and do 20th century crazy techniques to do something fresh and new. You know what I mean? Like it's nice to just hear something fresh and new that didn't require something so extravagant, you know?
No, I appreciate it. Me, when I'm writing for my compositions, the main thing that I'm always trying to put first, is the melody. I always try to have a strong melody that's stated, and then the solos, you know, we take it from there. I'm always thinking very melodic and just trying to tell a story for the most part for the listeners.
Yeah, sure. Great. Well, you know, I think it'd be a good time just to jump into a Facebook question. We did grab a few. Let's see. Dustin Woodard says, what are some good ways to get students to improvise on their own and not be scared of it?
The best way to improvise, honestly, you have to listen. You have to listen a lot more. You have to go back to the beginning. And if we're talking about vibraphone players, this is around Lionel Hampton time. You can listen to artists like Lionel Hampton and another guy by the name of Red Norvo. So you listen to those earlier guys, the way they played and how they outlined chords and how they pretty much got through simple changes. You know, if you take, I'm thinking Lionel Hampton's classic song "Flying It Home." You can listen to something like that, and you can listen to any one of his recordings back then, and you hear what he was clearly doing. So basically, what you're doing, you're transcribing. You try to play what Lionel played on the vibraphone, and then from there, you kind of take his ideas and develop into your own. I kind of look at it like it's a baby being born. When a baby is born, the first thing that the baby tries to do is try to copy the people that are around us, mainly your mother and father. You try to talk like them and everything. But eventually, as the year goes by, the child starts to have his own voice. So it's the same thing as improv. You try to copy somebody, but then you have to have your own voice. So you just go out and be around other people. Same thing in music. You go out and listen to other musicians, and you put things together.
So I have a question kind of to follow up with that. I know I've heard Anders Estrand talk about this, and I read an article about it a while back, and who else? There's one other person I heard. I can't remember who it was. Oh, Stefon Harris talked about rhythm is actually kind of like that, where you should start improvising, because like harmony, melody, that gets very advanced, and you can clash with things, obviously. But if you can get kind of the rhythms under your hands, that it all becomes easier. Do you agree with that, or would you start with chord structure, or what?
I wouldn't. It's not a disagree or disagree thing. I would say that's another way of going about it. If you're taking something simple, I'll go to like classical snare drum etudes. You can take a lot of the simple exercises. When you look at a book like a snare drum etude, and you pick like the first 5 in the beginning of the book, you can take rhythms like that and kind of just place notes over top of those rhythms, and from there you kind of have like jazz 101 harmony with rhythm, as long as you're playing the right notes. So, yes, I do agree with Stefon Harris on that.
I thought we were going to get away with one episode without talking about snare drum etudes. I thought. I guess it's not possible. Laurel, what was your question, Laurel?
It's closely related to Ben's question, but first I have a comment about, just a commonplace thing. I don't know if he was teaching it when you were at Berkeley, Warren, but Dave Samuels taught this class that was clearly like beginnings of jazz improvisation for all you nerdy conservatory kids.
Yeah.
He didn't call it that, but that's what it was. Did that exist
right?
when you were at Berkeley?
I did not have a class like that with Dave. I've never actually had a class like that in general. Dave was my private instructor at Berkeley for 7 of 8 semesters. So I studied with Dave for 6 semesters straight, and then I went to Ed Sandy for 1. And then I came back for my very last semester and studied with Dave. So
Wow.
I don't know about a class like that. I'll have to ask him that when I talk to him.
Yeah, it was really funny, and you could just tell he cared about it, but he just hated us so much. But anyway, Casey and I both took a few classes at Berkeley, even though we were just down the street at the Boston Conservatory. So.
Okay. So did you guys study with Nancy?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I took a few classes.
Yeah.
She's dope.
Yeah. My question for you though is related to like how do you break down, kind of the beginnings of jazz. I've seen a lot of master classes from, well, not a lot, but more than 2 master classes from great jazz vibe players where they're trying to give this large group of people kind of a type of basic vocabulary on how to understand doing anything jazzy on vibes.
I think, again, it goes back to what I was just saying. So I'll give you a quick example of what I did in the beginning, or I should say what my father did, because my father, well, his name is Warren Wolf, which makes me Warren Wolf Jr.
Oh, really? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so my dad, he was he's retired now, but he was a Baltimore City history teacher, but on the weekends he played music. So, let's see. There was this alto player by the name of Charlie Parker. Somebody wrote a book called the Omni Book, based off of all of Charlie Parker's solos from, I guess, the 1940s and 50s. And they took all of his solos and transcribed them and put them down in this book. So in order for me to have a decent understanding of jazz harmony, my dad actually took this book, and we would practice these solos every day, just so I can understand what was really going on. He didn't really tell me exactly what was happening, but over time I just happened to really understand it. So again, I mean, that's the best answer I can kind of give you. You have to listen to multiple artists. So for me, it started with Charlie Parker, on to Miles Davis, and then I started listening to people who played my instrument. I started listening to Lionel Hampton, Milt Jackson, and I didn't get into Gary Burton just yet because he was playing something a little different. His stuff was a little bit more advanced, in my opinion, than what the other guys were playing. So, you know, transcribing is like the best thing that you can do in order to start getting your jazz vocabulary down. And then after that, you know, it's just what you do. If you have to go out and hang out in nightclubs and things like that and actually play with different bands to see what happens.
That sounds very scary to me.
Well, it is scary. And well, it wasn't scary for me so much. I started hanging out in nightclubs with my father, of course, when I was 11 years old. And I should not be in nightclubs at 11 years old, but, you know, we were there. But, you know, I talk to a lot of my younger students I know nowadays, and a lot of people, they're just afraid of just going out, and they're afraid of being heard. But I try to tell people, and this is in any profession, we all suck at one point. But you have to go out and just put your skills to use, and that's how we get better. So I clearly remember many times when I was here in Baltimore, being in the nightclubs, and I was okay. You know, I was just playing a lot of blues. I was playing a lot of blues notes. I didn't really understand a lot of like minor chords and augmented and dominant, you know, things like that. I was just playing blues all the time. It wasn't until I got to Berkeley where I really got a chance to understand that stuff. So it started for me in the fall of 1997 at Wally's Jazz Cafe down on the corners of Massachusetts and Columbus Avenue, Boston. And that was like, honestly, the best training ground for me. School gave me the knowledge and the book smarts, but being actually in it, and I should say in it, you know, really helped.
And was that this is when you were in school, and would you go with other vibraphone players, or did you guys all kind of find your own path, or how did you start out playing when you were at Berkeley? How did you get into that scene?
There was a drummer. He lives here in Maryland, actually in Annapolis. His name was John Lampkin. And he was playing drums at this nightclub every Friday and Saturday night. So I think, you know, word gets around really quickly at Berkeley. So somebody must have told him, hey, John, there's a guy from Baltimore who's new to Berkeley, and he plays vibes. He knew who I was, but I didn't know who he was. Okay. So what they did, they just asked, they said, hey, why don't you come down to the club and play? And I said, sure. You know, I didn't...
Like kind of like a blind date.
Yeah. I didn't know too much, you know, so I went down there and I played the few songs that I knew. And I think for the night, it was a 4-hour gig and we got paid $50, which was fine for me because I'm just 17 years old in college. So,
yeah, right.
Great.
Sweet.
So, after we finished the first night, John says to me, he said, man, you sound pretty good. Why don't you come back tomorrow night? So again, it's just more about playing and playing and playing. Something just came to mind. I was watching a program on HBO a few days ago about Kobe Bryant when he first entered the league. You know, he first entered the NBA, I think, at the age of 17. So his first, you know, he's one of the greatest players of all time. But his first 2 seasons, or maybe 3 seasons, they were really rough. So he said in order for him to get better, he actually went to a gym and shot free throws all night. I mean, just really all night until he didn't miss. He just kept making shots all day. So for me, the club, it started with that Friday night. I came back to Saturday night. They called me again next week, say, hey, do you want to play again? So Friday, Saturday night at the club from 9:30 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. Also, along with playing in school all day. So also sometimes after school, after the classes were over, a lot of my friends, we will all get together in practice rooms for about 2 hours and just play and see what would happen. So it was just a process of just trying to get better every day.
So is that when your coffee addiction started?
You know, you said HBO and Kobe Bryant, and I suddenly just thought of Kobe Bryant as a Game of Thrones character, and it was yeah. Oh, did Ben lose it perfectly? Hey, well, speaking of Ben, Ben's going to talk about Gary Burton.
Yeah, so AC requested actually today that I talk about this book called Portraits and Rhythm.
Hey, he mentioned snare drum etudes. I did not. So
that was a joke. Just not to brag or anything, but I had my birthday was about a week ago on January 23rd, and I share my birthday with several important music people in the percussion world, including Morris Poulter, who's a fantastic multi-percussionist, John Luther Adams, who's a composer, and a very famous jazz vibraphonist by the name of Gary Burton. And so I think it was on my birthday, I started reading Gary Burton's autobiography, which is fantastic. It's called Learning to Listen, The Jazz Journey of Gary Burton, and I've almost finished it at this point. Yeah, Gary Burton actually in this bio talks about attending Berklee and playing in a lot of clubs and stuff, just like Warren was talking about, and he says that's really, kind of where you receive your education is, out on the job. So anyway, the little bio on Gary Burton here. He was born January 23rd, 1943 in Anderson, Indiana. He grew up in rural Indiana, and he studied with a woman by the name of Evelyn Tucker at a young age. And Evelyn, it sounds like, was kind of like the kooky theatrical music teacher. And she put on these huge productions of student recitals. And she taught him how to use four mallets, which was, significantly less common in the 40s and 50s than it is today. And she was also one of the largest mallet instrument dealers in the world. So Gary Burton, from a very young age, actually was able to get a professional level vibraphone to play on. And Gary Burton did not come from necessarily a musical family, and the way that his parents weren't career musicians, but throughout his childhood, they started the Burton family band, and he kind of became the star of the family band, and they had gigs all around. They at one point had a gig in Miami for a week. Keep in mind they're from rural Indiana, so that must have been quite the experience for them. So anyway, after his kind of growing up years, he ended up moving to Boston to attend Berklee, where he went for only 1 year before he moved to New York and started his professional career at the age of 18 or so. He quickly established himself playing with the George Shearing Quintet, and then a few years after that played with Stan Getz, the Stan Getz Quartet, for about, how many years was it? 3 years or so, something like that. In 1967, he left the Getz Quartet to start his own group with guitarist Larry Coryell, drummer Roy Haynes, and bassist Steve Swallow. And Steve Swallow remained with Gary Burton for about, I think, 20 years after that. And then at the age of 25 in 1968, he received the Jazzman of the Year award from Downbeat, which he was the youngest person to ever receive that award. And to date, he's one of only 3 people, 25 or younger, to receive that award. It's kind of the most prestigious award offered from Downbeat. In 1969, he had his first duo collaboration with Chick Corea. There was a sort of solo concert organized between a bunch of artists that did solo things. So Gary Burton played solo vibraphone, Chick Corea played solo piano, and so on. And the organizer had an idea to get all 6 of the people that had participated on that concert together for the closing number. And the only 2 that were interested in volunteering for that were Gary Burton and Chick Corea. So that's how their duo got started. And in this autobiography, he has just amazing anecdotes from all sorts of people. But one of my favorites is he was embarking on this very ambitious album with Chick Corea, and Chick had to write a full album worth of tunes in 4 weeks or something like that. And after a week or 2, Gary Burton calls Chick and says, hey, how's everything coming? Is it all going well? And Chick said to him, I haven't started writing yet, but don't worry, I found some great score paper. So that was pretty interesting. In 1982, Gary Burton made a trip with with Chick Corea, to be clear, to the Soviet Union, which that was kind of at the height of the Cold War. So that was a fairly significant affair that he was able to go over and share jazz music with Soviet Russia. And I was telling Casey earlier, he met a talented student that had made his own practice instrument out of blocks of wood that didn't have pitches, just surfaces for him to practice hitting. And whenever this kid went around, school, he could play on a vibraphone, but at home he had to practice on this thing he had created. So Burton actually had Musser send this kid a vibraphone, and then there was this whole thing, you can read about it in the book, where he couldn't just directly mail it to the kid because of the diplomatic situation. So it had to be mailed to the American embassy, who passed it off to some school, and the kid collected it, in the dark of night and took it home himself or something like that.
Wow.
So really interesting stuff in there. And then one of the more significant aspects of Gary Burton is that in 1994 he came out as gay, and he was one of the first openly gay jazz musicians. And he had really kind of hidden that part of his identity from himself and the community for so long because he wasn't sure he would fit in. But alas, he did, and he's basically said he didn't have any problems with working at Berkeley or gigging with musicians or anything like that. No one took any offense to it. A lot of people had kind of already figured it out. And yeah, it wasn't a big deal at all. I did mention he taught at Berkeley for several years, and he kind of worked his way up the ladder. He retired in 2004 as the president of Berkeley. He's
Vice president.
Vice president. I thought he was president. Well, vice president. He's received 21 Grammy nominations and 7 Grammy Awards spanning 5 decades. He's performed with some of the biggest names in jazz and just music in general, including Pat Metheny, who he discovered, really, Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, Peter Erskine, B.B. King, Katie Lang, and Astor Piazzolla. And he is, I didn't get the year for this, but he is a PAS Hall of Fame member. So, yeah, that's Gary Burton. And Warren, did you work with Gary Burton at all when you were in Boston at Berkeley or anything like that?
No. When I got there, Gary was the vice president.
Yeah,
and I
after his teaching stuff, yeah.
The first time I met Gary, what happened? I was a student in school, and they asked me and 4 of my friends to come on a cruise. We went from New York to London. It was the QE2 jazz cruise, and that was a long cruise. Just being in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean for almost 1 week, I was like, man. But that was my first time. Actually, we didn't play. I just had a chance to just talk to him a little bit. But the first time I actually played with Gary, first and only time, was maybe 2 years ago. We actually recorded a live record with the Mack Avenue Super Band live at the Detroit Jazz Festival. And actually, some of that footage is on YouTube. So if you just type in Warren Wolf and Gary Burton, you'll see some of that stuff.
Great.
And also, I had the pleasure of recording one of those songs that he recorded with Chick Corea from his album Crystal Silence. The name of the song is titled "Senior Mouse." So
yeah,
I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Played that on your show in Columbia.
Yeah.
Laurel, Jim Benoit has a really cool arrangement of Senior Mouse. Yeah.
Yes. Did I play it or somebody else?
I thought you played the tune in Columbia. Or maybe you're just talking about it.
I only played that song with one pianist, and my regular pianist wasn't with me, but I usually play that song generally. But you can find footage of that on YouTube. Just type in Warren with Gary Burton, and you'll see myself playing marimba and Gary is playing vibes.
Cool.
Live records. But,
the performance I'll always remember was Gary and Makoto Ozone.
Oh yeah.
And it's just vibes and piano, and there was just so much music. Like there was so much going on. I mean, and I don't mean like activity or volume, but it was as fulfilling as a full big band. There was just so much music going on.
Go ahead.
Oh, and then afterwards, people are saying hello and congratulating, and I saw this dude. They played oh shoot, I'm gonna forget the tune right now. Of course, probably think of it later. But they played this beautiful, beautiful tune together, and this dude's like talking to him, shaking his hand. He's like, "Yeah, can you send me that arrangement?" And he's just like, the guy, they don't even know each other. Like they don't even know each other or anything, and And poor Gary Burton's like, yeah, maybe, like what? And I was just like, no, dude.
Yeah, like, do you understand what just happened?
Yeah, I know, like, do you understand what you, anyway,
Wow.
it's funny. Hey, let's break to another quick Facebook question for Warren, and then we'll try to scoot through the topics. Let's see. One talked about you talked about classical training. Let's see. I think you've covered actually a lot of this.
Can I jump in with one, Casey, while you're looking?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just curious of how the PASIC concert came up that you played with Joe Locke, Stefon Harris, and Tony Miceli. What that experience was like, and whose idea was that to put all of you together? It's a great concert, by the way.
The idea for that concert actually came from the man himself in marimba, Mr. Lee Howard Stevens. So Tony Miceli, myself, Stefon Harris, and Joe Locke, we're all artists for Mallet Tech.
Mm-hmm.
Lee had just created these two vibraphones, one called the Omega and another one called the Love Vibe. They're pretty much all black, but he's changing the color of the keys. So I think the one we played at PASIC had red bars.
Yeah, I've seen a green one too.
So we played a concert, and it was a lot of fun. I don't ever see that happening again. It was kind of, I don't feel like it was pretty hard trying to get everybody scheduled together.
Yeah, but
real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to interject. In the Burton book, he talks actually about a similar scenario where it was Gary Burton, Milt Jackson, Lionel Hampton, Red Norvo, and I think Terry Gibbs.
Yeah.
All performed together with 5 vibraphones lined up on stage. And he
a
said
lot.
they didn't plan out ahead of time what to do, and kind of they got up on stage and Lionel Hampton just called out a tune, and they all just kind of hacked through it.
Wow. That kind of sounds like one of those movies, like, oh yeah, let's just put in like every major star who's who's hip right now, and the movie
Arranged by Lee Howard Stevens.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there could have been other artists who were there, but it just so happened, like I said, we're like the jazz guys who are on Mallet Tech. But if we actually had like the jazz vibraphonists, there would have been at least 20 of us on stage.
yeah.
We had a great time. So.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome.
Laurel, what do you have for us today?
Oh, well, what I have is just to give you guys a summary of an article I read, and to just let you know the ways that it got my brain thinking. So what I read is called "What Does It Mean to Be Musical?" And it's an article by Daniel Levitan, and that's not Levitan of the Marimba Quartet. This is Daniel Levitan, the neuroscientist. It's published in, Neuron Magazine, which is a medical journal. So the article itself is very much leaned towards like those that are studying neuroscience. And so a good bit of the article I'm not going to share because it's just not relevant to us, but there are certain points where he gets into these ideas about genetics. And that's what the article is really about, is using music as a way to study genetics and neuroanatomy to really understand how genes influence your actions or your phenotype, like how they represent themselves in the world. Anybody out there that's never heard of Daniel Levitan, perhaps you've heard of one of his books called This Is Your Brain on Music. He has another called The World in 6 Songs, and a new one just came out called The Organized Mind, which I haven't read yet, but I've read little summations, and it looks really, really interesting. He also has several many articles that he's written for different journals, and all of these are cataloged really nicely on his website, so you can check those out. But as I said, this one is all about using music as the means to study the brain, and it's because, let me find it. He says it really well. Music is processed component by component, so very specific areas of the brain deal with different parts of music. There's no musical spot in the brain. It's the whole thing all the time. And so part of the article he goes through that. For example, listening to music activates reward and pleasure circuits in the nucleus accumbens, and he lists all these other words that are way too big to say on a podcast.
No, Ben's a doctor. You can do it. Go on.
Or that
Pronunciation.
musical training is associated with changes in the gray matter volume and cortical representation. And that, I think I've talked about briefly before, that musicians' brains are the only brains that show change from an occupation. So there was this study that involved autopsies of brains, and of every profession, music is the one that actually changes your brain. So that is really, really interesting. And lastly, for the composers and improvisers out there, he says, writing music involves circuits distinct from other kinds of writing, which means just because, yeah, perhaps you communicate well in language, it's totally different to write music, which I find really, really fascinating. So again, it's all about the study of genes and how they come to be represented in real life. And let me find my next excerpt. For example, they've gone through this a little bit already with dancers. And in a study of the genetics of dancers, they found that there's this particular gene, which is ABPR1A, just for anybody listening.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah.
Right, yeah, you've heard of that before,
yeah,
right?
I got it.
Which has been shown to mediate affiliative, social, and courtship behaviors, learning and memory, and also pain sensitivity. It's very interesting. In that same study, they found significant differences between dancers and non-dancers in a different specific gene, which I'll call the SLC gene, which is known to play a role in spiritual experience. Right? Yeah. Super interesting. So moving forward, what's interesting about those two genes is that the SLC gene can affect a certain chemical that plays a huge role in the AV gene, which means that there's a sort of epistatic relationship between those two things. And so then it's no longer an issue of, if you have this, that happens, they can work together. Along those same lines, they found that that same AV gene is shown to be associated with listening behaviors and audio structuring ability. So I guess what you were talking about, Warren, with do a lot of listening so that you understand how to improvise. This particular gene helps with that. Also, that connection between AV gene and the SLC gene has a lot to do with musical memory. AV has also been linked to anxiety and depression, which really perked my ears up because that totally explains medically the artistic temperament. Where we tend to think of artists as those that they tend to be depressed or anxious or something, this gene actually functions in both of those ways. It makes you receptive to sound. It makes you more sensitive to behavior. Therefore, it also affects you emotionally in terms of anxiety and depression.
Maybe that Akegim guy that they talk about had that.
Right. But just a few things that I found myself thinking about while reading this article. I was really intrigued by the SLC gene, the one with kind of spiritual experience, because there's often conversation from artists about how their art is almost like their religion or something, and they find such meaning in it, and that's how I interpret what they say when they say spiritual experience. It's ultimately just the meaning. And I think of, Beethoven saying there's no higher revelation than music. And, on a more kind of pedestrian note, it explains why when music is good in churches, people like to go to that church. I mean, not to diminish anything about that, but it kind of helps explain it. To conclude, Levitan says that musicality is a complex interaction of physical, emotional, cognitive, and psychosocial traits, including some that aren't overtly musical, so things like discipline, like compassion, and others that are not, but that contribute to musicality in a variety of ways. And he, of course, goes on to say that music is almost a key to learning how to study genetics because it affects so many areas of the brain, and because those areas are on the complete spectrum, from really basic, low functioning to incredibly high functioning. I mean, a gene that has to do with spiritual experience. It's crazy to think there's a gene that actually has to do with that. So it's really, really interesting in that way. But for us, moving forward as people who are, trying to make our living being musicians and doing things that we love, and inevitably becoming advocates for the arts or educators, that, of course, a big part of neuro research and music is that does music make you smarter? And that's a big focus right now. This article was published in 2012, and so by now there's probably been a bit of development about that. But of course, as neuroanatomy is more closely attuned, we'll be able to near the ability to see what types of musical traits inform cognitive and psychosocial behaviors, which will just be another road for us to be able to talk about music, to program concerts, to be able to connect with those that think they aren't musical when really, no, they are to some degree, but maybe not in the same ways that those of us are that produce the music ourselves. So this is just the first of a few articles that I'll be reporting on for you guys, just because I find the brain is so fascinating. It's such a fascinating thing. And in terms of music cognition, which has always been an interest of mine, Daniel Levitan is, he's kind of at the forefront of this. He has an entire lab at McGill University devoted to studying music and the brain. It's just really, really cool. So that's my topic. If you guys want to add anything, great. If not, we can just get to more Facebook questions.
I can kind of.
Can you hold up the book?
Oh, it's just an article.
Oh, it's just an article. Okay, I didn't know.
We actually went through literal hell printing it today, so that she literal, literal. Like I was waiting through.
Yeah,
I was waiting through molten lava to get it printing. It was so difficult. We just had printer problems this morning. But sorry, Warren, you were going to say something.
I can't add to too much, but I actually did something, a study recently, about 2 years ago, what you're talking about, at Johns Hopkins University. A friend of mine named Monica Lopez, she's a medical student there, but she minors in jazz piano. She wanted to do a study on, because I also play piano. She wanted to do a jazz study on pianists and see how the brain works with seeing images.
Oh.
Something like that. I'm trying to remember exactly. And the reason I guess I'm kind of shutting off from this experience, at least the second day of it. The second day, I had to lay down inside like this this big machine. I had to get inside. It was something I had to lay down, and they put me in, and basically this machine analyzes my brain while I'm looking at these pictures.
Oh yeah, you had a CT scan.
Yeah, I was freaking out over that though. Because the scan was just like so close to me. I just felt like I was trapped. I was like, okay, I need to get out of here. Let me out. But,
wow.
You must be claustrophobic.
No, I'm really not claustrophobic. It's just for that 1 second. But eventually, I had to calm down, and they went in, and everything was fine. But that was from what I remember. She analyzed the brain and off of a picture. She showed about a lot of pictures from sad to happy to, crying, and she wanted to know. Basically, I had a keyboard attached to these photos, so every picture that came up, she said, just play and let's see what happens. So she came up with a conclusion, but I just don't remember what it is. I'll comment at time and get that back to you. So.
Wow.
That's so cool. I've heard of that exact experiment. You know, they give someone an MRI or a CT and have them. And by the way, they only select like people they think are really awesome musicians for that. So that's probably, you know, a compliment that she wanted you to do it for sure. But that's so funny, Laurel, that you chose this topic and he happened to have actually done something.
Yeah, that's really crazy.
There was something else that you said that kind of caught my interest because my wife, she's a ballet dancer. So,
Oh.
you know, I was just like, okay. A lot of things going on.
That's cool.
We researched you, man. We looked into you. We looked into your background. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. At Percussion digs deep. It's cool. Way to go, Laurel. It's so interesting. Like I don't know. You hear this type of research all the time. Like they talk about music and the mind, and we were just talking about creativity with Ivan Trevino, and I was digging up things people have written on that, and it seems like it's just kind of endless. I really wonder though, like, so when they figure all that out and they finally like conclude something, I wonder what will we do differently with music? I'm assuming still probably nothing. We'll just.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, my hope is that we would, I don't know, somehow be able to use music to like actually heal people, or like true music therapy. You know.
Yeah.
That would be my hope with it, which is funny because that's been written about for thousands of years.
Or they'll have the Bruckner symphonies in pill format, and I won't have to sit through them. That's good. I got it.
Warren doesn't think it's
you
funny.
can just inject your Bruckner.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then maybe you can get addicted. You can get addicted to Bach or something, and then you got to go to therapy for your Bach addiction, and maybe that's where it's leading.
But also maybe even like using these types of studies as arguments for keeping music in schools.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's probably, you know, you need solid evidence for that.
Yeah, I know,
people who are not musicians.
This is always a risky thing to say, but I hear that a lot. Like, oh, we need music in schools because it makes kids smarter, and you know that sort of thing. And I'm like, yeah, I guess, but to me, it's like, what? Like, do we need English in schools because it makes kids better at math, or like, can't we just appreciate music because it's like culturally important? And I know that like you need every argument to get, but it's like I get so sick of hearing like, oh, it'll make your SAT scores better. It's like, yeah, and you can also discover really good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Laura, we were just talking to someone who said that exact same thing. They said, I'm tired of hearing music is good to make you at math, or it's better, it helps you with these other like actually important things. It's like, no, it's just good for you because it's good, and it's like.
Yeah, it's good for you in so many ways.
That seems like that's kind of the challenge for us all is like this constant grind of like justifying its existence, and at least in school.
Mm-hmm.
Megan, what do you have for us today?
Well, just finished editing the February issue of Rhythm Scene for PAS, and it's coming out on Monday. And there's an article in there called Jazz Vibraphone Pedagogy, Ask the Masters. It's written by Tyler Tolles, who's a graduate student at Florida State in classical percussion and jazz as well. And he went through and email interviewed several important jazz pedagogues. And those were Rusty Burge at CCM, John Metzger at Elon University, Tony Miceli at University of the Arts Temple University in Curtis, and Ed Smith at University of North Texas. So I thought he asked a really great variety of questions. You can go in and read these interviews, but I wanted to turn one of them around to Warren. First of all, Warren, I was wondering how much you teach, how much of a part of your life is teaching? Or do you play mostly?
I play mostly, but at one point it was a huge part.
Okay.
And you taught at Berkeley for 2 years, right?
Yeah, I graduated from there in 2001, and then I stayed in Boston, just played around the city for 1 year, and then I started teaching there in 2003 for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the classroom 4 days per week. But I left Berkeley on good terms because I wanted to travel, and From that point, I would say 2004, 2005, I've taught very seldomly. If somebody happens to want and I'm not talking just vibraphone lessons. I mean, I'll play the vibes, but I can teach anybody, horn player, pianist. You know, I do drum lessons. You know, it's just depending on what that person wants. I'm always trying to bring the ideas out of them. So that's private instruction. Starting this fall in 2016, I'll actually be joining the faculty at, as well as Tony. I'll be at Temple University.
Oh, cool.
Starting in the fall of next year, 2017, I'm joining the faculty of San Francisco Conservatory of Music.
No way.
Wow, congrats. That's
Amazing.
awesome.
Cool.
Yes, and also, I mean, slowly but surely, I'm also trying to get back to Berkeley. I actually taught at Berkeley all last Tuesday. I taught a bunch of ensembles for a friend of mine. I was substituting for her. So it's very much there, because I really enjoy teaching. You know, it's one thing to share my gift with the general public who likes to hear music, but then it's another thing I want to actually take some of these ideas and get it out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, totally. Well, you know, on last Sunday when we were chatting, you mentioned that you had a background in classical music too. So I wanted to throw this question of Tyler's back to you, which is, do you believe all college percussionists should study jazz vibes? And if so, what are the benefits for a student whose focus is in another aspect of percussion?
Should all college students study jazz vibes?
Obviously, percussion students.
Yeah, I would say yes and no. Well, first of all, let's put this number one. It doesn't have to be jazz vibes. It can also be marimba as well. You can play jazz marimba too.
Good point. Yeah.
I would say at least have some type of background in it, because depending on what you want to do with your career, now it's just all depending on who's listening, or depending on what you want to do. There are many jobs out here where somebody might be required to play some type of improv. I believe you should know what you're doing. It might not be to the level of Gary Burton or anybody else, but at least you can do it.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I used to think that most classical percussionists who were in conservatories, I thought their main goal was to just be in symphony orchestras. And maybe that's true to a certain degree, but then I realized there are a lot of other jobs out here, such as, you can go to LA, you can be a studio musician and have a great living doing that. So, and when, it's just important to learn all of that stuff. Not only just jazz, but, even the percussionists, have a background in jazz drum set. Like my teacher, before John Locke, this guy named Leo LePage. He was a member of the Baltimore Symphony. He's now deceased, but he was a member of the Baltimore Symphony for years. And the thing that I liked about him was that he was a jazz drummer in Boston before moving to Baltimore. So I remember as a kid, I used to see the band, the Baltimore Symphony, play, and sometimes they would have these little pieces where, say like the Baltimore Pops or like the Boston Pops, groups like that. So he would be the one on the drums playing jazz music, even though he's primarily classical percussion. So I would say yes, it's important, just so you can have some type of background in it. My whole thing, again, this last point, I'll answer the second part, is that you should want to be, if it's possible, but you should always want to be the complete musician. I studied classical music from the age of 4 until 18.
Okay.
And throughout that time, I still studied jazz. I studied popular music. I'm a 80s baby, even though I was born in 1979. So I studied a lot of Motown music. I studied a lot of pop music, like Anita Baker, and I studied the Beatles. And I'm just a fan of all music. So yes, study as much as you can. If I had to say all of that.
Very cool. Makes sense. And so when you were studying classical, it was also piano and percussion
no.
too, or no? Okay.
No. So when I was studying with Leo, we, at least at the time, maybe there wasn't any pieces that was made from marimba, but I played nothing but flute concertos, violin sonatas, violin concertos, and things like that. My first tour with the Baltimore Symphony, I was 7 years old. I was a percussionist. We went on a 2-week tour with the Baltimore Symphony playing the Pied Piper Fantasy with James Galway as the special guest. I was just one of the, you know, the story of the Pied Piper. I was one of the little kids who played drums, and once James Galway, the piper, played his flute, he took us away. You know the story of Pied Piper. You know, the town didn't pay the flautist the money, so he played the song and took their kids away. So I was one of the drummers. They took us away.
Okay.
So that was the first tour. And throughout the years, up until the age of 17, I special guest, not in the back of the orchestra, but I was always up front playing pieces like the Paul Creston's Marimba Concerto, Vivaldi's Piccolo Concerto in C major, and a bunch of other pieces. I really don't remember. That was so long ago now.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I studied with him, with Leo, and then once I went to high school, that's when John Locke came into my life. And I think I'm going off point, but what was your question one time?
Oh, I was just asking if you had studied piano at all.
Oh, no.
You play piano too.
No, I didn't study any piano. I was self-taught on piano.
Got it.
So my dad, again, when I was saying that he was a history teacher, my dad pretty much learned everything that he knows about music just by reading books. Like he bought the instrument and he sat down and read a book. This is how you do this. This is how you construct this chord. This is how you play. He's an educator. He likes to read. So my dad, at the age of 5 or 6, he taught me basic chords. But as I got older, he never taught me the correct way how to play piano. Now, if you sit down and actually heard me play piano, I can really play. I'm not bragging, but I can really play like a lot of chords. I can move. But when it comes to playing certain fast things, I'm going to get in the camera so you guys can see, I'm doing this. Like I play.
You don't have the technique, Yeah,
I don't have the technique. When I see all those little numbers on piano scores, I don't know. Like if somebody asked me right now to play an E flat major scale on the piano, I'll probably mess it up. Just to be honest. So no, I didn't study classical piano. I studied all classical snare drum. I studied just total percussion in general in high school. We had to do everything from timpani to chime, snare drum, crash cymbals, marimba, xylophone, vibraphone, and yeah, that was pretty much it.
Very cool.
Yeah, great. Well, but you do have some cool piano credits. I was reading through your bio, and you're playing piano for a handful of groups and some recordings too. Is that right?
Yeah. I think the good recording that I've done, I would say 80%, actually 90% piano was with a vocalist by the name of Rachel Price. She's actually the vocalist right now for a very hot group called Lake Street Dive. They've been all over the world, but I toured with her for about 5 years, and we recorded her record. And she knew that I played vibes, so she actually played vibes on 2 tracks. But mainly just piano. And I still play a lot of piano nowadays. It just depends. It's funny how it goes. Like when I'm home, somebody will call and say, "Warren, can you do this drum gig? Can you come on the road and play drums?" So sometimes for a good week, I forget that I'm playing vibes. Like I'll go practice nothing but drums.
Yeah.
And then say, "Hey, come play some piano for me." Like, okay, I forget that I'm a drummer and a vibraphone player.
Yeah.
But then 80% of my life is all just mallets.
Yeah. How much of the year are you on the road?
I would say I'm on nowadays, and it's only getting worse/good.
Yeah.
Half of the year.
Wow.
Wow, that's a lot.
And you have a family too, right?
Yes, I have 4 kids.
Wow.
With a 5th one due in April.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my goodness.
So,
congratulations.
but I mean, I can say this on here. I mean, all well, soon to be 5. All 5 kids do not live with me. I'm divorced, so I had 3 older kids with my ex-wife, and I got remarried. So my youngest son is here in Baltimore, and my wife is pregnant with the newborn. So it's a balance. Luckily, I have a very supportive wife, and then she understands because she's in the arts too. So she supports me totally. Sometimes she's tired. Like when I'm gone, she'll call and say, "Hey, when are you coming home?" I say, "Well, I'll be home in about 3 weeks." And,
Oh no.
But it's a nice balance. Between being gone and then I have to come home. I have to find time to practice, which doesn't happen too often. So I created this thing. It's nothing new, but it works for me. I actually do a thing called mental practicing. So I don't really actually get to an instrument at all. Not as much as I used to. It's just pretty hard to do that nowadays.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, wow, Warren, thanks so much for joining us. It was really cool, and thanks for doing it so kind of quickly scheduled and off the cuff, and I thought it was really fantastic. So you all, it's warrenwolfmusic.com, and there's great stuff there. Please listen, and I enjoyed Wolfgang on Spotify, so I hope everyone does the same. And man, thank your family very much for letting us borrow you for an hour and a half or so.
Well, she's not home right now, but it's okay.
Well, you can tell you were working,
Yeah.
Cool. Anyway, you guys, thanks so much. We'll catch you next time, and I guess everyone be on the lookout. We got Alejandro Vignal, Mark Applebaum, and some exciting guests coming up. So, all right, thanks, guys. Take it easy.
Bye.
Bye.